You're watching the legal breakdown. So, Glenn, we've got some potentially career ending news for Rudy Giuliani, insofar as he had a career, and another major legal issue for Donald Trump. According to a new lawsuit now, among other accusations, Giuliani was said to have been selling pardons for $2 million a pop, with proceeds being split between him and Trump. There are reportedly recordings also proving as much. What would this mean if true?
Well, it would mean that Rudy Giuliani will be facing multiple federal felonies. He'll be facing a potential revocation of his law license. He will be facing a successful legal suit, the suit brought by Miss Dunphy. It really is. And Donald Trump, of course, will have added exposure. And beyond that, it could sort of throw into question any pardons that Donald Trump may have delivered in the waning hours of his presidency, some of which I'm quite sure we haven't learned about yet, because I absolutely believe Donald Trump delivered secret pardons, or what I call pocket pardons.
Now, could you dig into that aspect of this a little bit, the impact that this will have on other pardons that were actually given?
So it's interesting. In the lawsuit filed by Miss Dunphy, she alleges that Rudy Giuliani told her that he was selling pardons, as you say, $2 million a pop, splitting the proceeds with Donald Trump. And it's interesting because some of what Miss Dunphy said Rudy was telling her were things like, well, I have immunity, so I can commit crimes. He probably meant he has a pardon, so he thought that gave him a license to commit crimes. Of course, it doesn't. You can only pardon somebody for past criminal behavior. But she also relates that he said things like, but listen, these pardons can't go through the normal channels. They can't go through the office of the pardon attorney, because then they could be subject to FOIA, Freedom of Information Act demands. When I hear these kind of things, Brian, it all kind of rings true, because the ordinary course of business is for these pardons to go through the office of the pardon attorney to be vetted. The other thing that this made me think back to was some of what we learned from the January 6th House Select Committee public hearings. Remember how Jared Kushner was caught in a deposition saying, I didn't have time to be concerned about all this, White House counsel ethics stuff in the final days of my father-in-law's presidency, because I was just busy cranking out as many pardons as I could. Looks like maybe he had a money incentive, a financial motive to be cranking out those pardons. So, there are a lot of things that sort of ring true. What does it mean for other pardons? So I've always maintained that a corruptly delivered pardon could be challenged in the federal courts, and I think federal courts would invalidate them. Let me use a concrete example. I believe Donald Trump delivered a corrupt pardon, a voidable pardon, to his criminal associate, Roger Stone. Why do I say that? Well, Donald Trump told Roger Stone, stay strong, don't cooperate, when Roger Stone was indicted for, among other things, lying to Congress to protect Donald Trump. Trump said, stay strong, don't be a snitch. Basically, I got you. And Roger Stone did precisely that. He stayed strong. He didn't cooperate with prosecutors. He didn't flip on Donald Trump. He didn't plead guilty. He went to trial. He was convicted on all counts. And then, after being sentenced to 40 years 40 months in prison, 3 days before Roger Stone was scheduled to report to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, he gave an interview. And it was an interview for Donald Trump's benefit. And he said to journalist Howard Feinman, I stayed strong for you, Mr. President. Now I want a sentence commutation. And that same day, Donald Trump commuted his sentence, and he did not have to report to the Federal Bureau of Prisons to begin that 40-month sentence. Thereafter, Donald Trump delivered him a full pardon. What I just described, Brian, is obstruction of justice. It's a corruptly delivered pardon in order to buy silence. These are the kind of pardons that can and should be challenged by the Department of Justice. And now, if it is true that Rudy was selling them at $2 million a pop, again, those are corrupt pardons. They're criminal pardons, and they need to be fought in the courts.
Now, gaming this out forward, what is the punishment for something like this if Trump and Giuliani are found to have done it?
So I haven't dug into the United States Code, my big, ugly blue book of federal laws. This story just broke. But I suspect there are probably a full half dozen laws, federal laws, that would be violated. It is a gross abuse, a criminal abuse of office and of power. If you are sort of selling the influence that you have and the power that you wield as a result of holding high government office. So the devil's in the details. There could be some sort of bribery going on. There could be sort of a theft of government services going on. But I'll have to dig into the United States Code and figure out precisely what laws would be violated if people were engaged in selling presidential pardons.
Now, Glenn, this obviously has some major implications if what Ms. Dunphy is alleging is true. So I believe that this case was filed in New York. Would this be the kind of thing that would be moved over to the federal court system? Because it would implicate Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani basically just selling pardons for money while he was president?
I think the answer is no, because thus far, the only named defendant or respondent, I believe, is Rudy Giuliani and his companies, not the president. And Rudy Giuliani, yes, he may have been the attorney to the president, one of the president's fixers, really more accurately, but he was not a federal government employee or official. So there would be absolutely no reason for this case to be removed from New York State court into federal court. And I have to tell you, when I was reading some of the details, some of the allegations, it's really interesting that Ms. Dunphy, for example, cites the precise number of phone calls and on what day these calls were being made. And I assume she has the phone records to back it up. And it's remarkable because she's saying things like, he called me 22 times on this day. He called me 34 times this day, 44 times this day. He obsessively called me. And I have to believe she'll have the phone records to back that up. But the defense thus far offered by Rudy's attorney is she was never employed. I guess maybe she wasn't his type. But Rudy never employed this woman. Boy, well, then why are you calling her 20, 30, and 40 times a day each week? I'm really interested to see how this case ends up playing out.
Let's say, for example, that prosecutors do find some incriminating evidence against Donald Trump during discovery, for example, while they're looking into Rudy Giuliani. What happens in that case? What happens if Trump is implicated by virtue of what they find?
Well, Brian, the first thought that came to mind when I read this reporting is if this woman, Ms. Dunphy, is alleging and has evidence to back it up that Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump were in a conspiracy to sell presidential pardons for millions of dollars, why hasn't the FBI moved on something like this? Because if she's filed a civil suit, I have to believe the FBI probably got wind of who she was and what she was alleging. And I will wait to hear if she has been interviewed and put before the grand jury by Jack Smith, the special counsel investigating the crimes of Donald Trump, because, we are forever waiting for federal charges, for accountability to come for Donald Trump. And thus far, it seems to be, coming by virtue of civilians bringing suits when it really should be coming by federal prosecutors bringing indictments.
Yeah. All right, well, switching gears a little bit here, there's also reporting of some pretty inappropriate acts by Rudy Giuliani. I'm not going to mention them because YouTube will punish videos that use certain words, so I want to be careful here with what I say, but I would recommend reading some of the reporting here. But with that said, how seriously does New York take the kind of egregious workplace misconduct, we'll call it, that was outlined in this lawsuit? And again, that is the most sanitized way of expressing what he did, which was truly reprehensible.
Yeah, and I think by virtue of what we just saw in the E. Jean Carroll case, I mean, New York passed a law specifically that extended or opened up the period of time by which victims could bring these sorts of civil suits. So that is perhaps in response to the Me Too movement, and I think these are good developments. So I have to believe New York is on a good path, treating these kind of things more seriously rather than less seriously.
All right, and let's finish off with this. You'd spoken before about how Giuliani's law license could be in jeopardy if these allegations are proven true. To what extent does Rudy Giuliani have to, I guess, do the accusations against him have to be proven true for his law license to actually be at risk here?
Not necessarily proven true in a court of law. When you're admitted to a state bar after you pass the bar exam and you're sworn in, you are a member of that state bar and you are subject to being investigated for ethical violations by that state bar. Now, the state bar it's on a completely separate path from any criminal cases and any civil suits that are brought. All it takes is a complaint being made to the state bar of attorney misconduct or something being run in the media, for example, about attorney misconduct, and state bar counsel will initiate its own investigation. People may remember that Rudy Giuliani had a whole hearing in front of the D.C. city bar. It's not a state, it should be, but the D.C. Bar Council, and basically was adjudicated and found to have committed lots of ethical violations, I believe, in his representation of Donald Trump and these bogus court challenges he brought to try to challenge the results of the 2020 election. And I think he is up for disbarment. I think disbarment has been recommended by DC Bar Council. So it's a parallel proceeding, and it goes sort of at its own pace. Sometimes it can actually go quicker than court cases. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but you get a lot of the same procedural rights and protections that you get when you're involved in a civil suit or a criminal prosecution. But I have to believe the New York State Bar is already initiating an investigation into these allegations, and they will hold a hearing. They'll give him an opportunity to be heard and present evidence. And if they find he, committed these acts that Ms. Dunphy is alleging, he would very likely be up for disbarment.
Okay, well, obviously a lot more to keep on top of now with this new lawsuit having been filed, both with implications for Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. So just adding on to the mountain of legal issues that they're contending with right now. So with that said, we'll keep on top of this. For those watching, if you want to stay on top of this lawsuit among the raft of others, make sure to subscribe. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.